Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Deep Thoughts, Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today, during our talk today, I will be working on putting on some of the finishing touches on my very first Neophyte hybrids, which I will probably eventually put a picture up online with. But at this point, they're pretty much done. I've got to do I've got to do the basing on them, and maybe a little bit of detail on the face. But I'm going to get the basing done so that at least that's taken care of there. Finally finishing these guys. I didn't realize how many I had started to work on. I did the basic set of Neophyte hybrids that come with the Overkill box set, which is actually 16 different models because it comes with what is it? 12 with rifles, with autoguns or las guns, however you want to play them as. And then 2 with heavy mining lasers, or with mining lasers, and 2 with grenade launchers, which is nice because it gives you a nice quality set of guys to have those squads that you have, the 10-man squad that you can work with, and it's actually pretty close to a full 2-man squad. And I added 3 more guys from building. I'm in the process of building the rock grinder / Goliath truck. I'm putting them all magnetized so that I can use all the different weapons and actually have the rock grinder part on the front come on and off, because that's the biggest indicator. I glued the back on to the back here because I liked the look better. And the biggest indicator, whether it's a Goliath or a rock grinder, is really that giant plow in the front. And as long as I managed to find a way to magnetize that, I feel pretty secure in just being able to run them like that. I don't think people are going to be like, oh, well, that's not the back for the proper Goliath truck there. You know, it reads what it's supposed to read as long as that front prow can come off. But in that kit, there's actually 3 different little Dubros with guns that are part of that kit that are supposed to be standing on the top there. But I didn't like the look of that, and I didn't want to put them on the truck. So I've got the one guy with the auto gun on the top, and that's the only other person that I have on the kit. So I took the 3 other guys. They're perfectly good guys with las guns, with rifles there, and I just glued them onto 24 millimeter bases, the small bases, and they're just as good as the other guys, and they all fit in the same kind of loadout and gear, so it works really well. It's kind of a dark look to the guys I've got here. You'll see when I put up pictures, but I like it. I like the way they look. So anyway, so then I've got 19 guys that I did, and it took me a lot longer than I expected to build and paint all of these guys. But in the end, I think they look good. I think they're coming out pretty well. So that's what I'll be working on during this. And again, before we start getting into more of the topic, I do want to give a shout out to Allison Geiss over at Lauvtrekin. And she's an illustration commission. She does illustrations on commission. She did some incredible fan art of the Glacial Geek logo, which I will put up right now, so you can see that. How cool is that? I am beyond stoked. This is the first bit of fan art, and I think it's incredible fan art. I mean, it looks amazing, and it really grasps the logo, and it's just beautiful, and I think it's fantastic. So thank you so much, Allison, for that wonderful piece of art. So go check out her. I'll put links to her Tumbler and also to her Facebook page in the information below, so you can go check out her work, which is all fantastic, and she has some pieces, I think, for sale, and she also does commissions for illustration. So check that out. Go send her some love, and this is just an incredible piece that I am super excited about. All right, so with all of that said, on to the topic for today. And today's topic is going to be list building and the different ways that you can go about doing list building, because it's not just as simple as throwing pieces into a box and taking them to the store. There should be some thought that goes into each of these, into building a list, to try to figure out what it is that you want that list to do. So, the first bit of discussion when you're first sitting down to make a list, the first thing you need to do is, I know it's going to sound simple, but figure out what army you want to bring. So for me, for instance, I've got a couple different armies. I've got my Dark Angels, obviously, and I've started to build up my Gene Stealer Cult and my Death Watch. So the first thing I do is I figure out, who do I want to bring? Have I not brought one in a while? Do I want to try out some new units that I bought and built and painted? Do I have something else I want to get on the table? Is there something that I saw someone work with that I wanted to try to work in my own way? Either which way, that's the first step, is figure out, who do I want to play as? And sometimes it might come down to, trying to figure out what it is that you're going to do. So, for instance, am I just going to go have fun with my friends, in which case it doesn't really matter what army I bring, just going to be whatever I feel like playing? Or am I going to go for a tournament? Or am I going to be going up against someone to test their tournament list so that they can have a better idea of how their stuff is going to perform? In which case, I want to bring a tougher list. So I might bring my Ravenwing Strike Force if I'm trying to bring a tough list, because those guys can be pretty brutal. Or I might decide that I just want to try to do some fluffy thing, and my friend's bringing some Xenos, so I'm going to bring the Xenos Hunters and bring together my Death Watch squads and give them a shot and try them out against his Xenos and see if I can purge the alien, or if the alien's going to get the better of my alien hunters. Or do I want to try to be the aliens myself and bring an uprising cult that's coming to try to take over and uprise and take control of an imperial planet, and my friend's going to be bringing his imperial forces that have come to try to squash it. Either which way, that's the first step, is figure out what army you want to bring. A lot of people, they only have the one army, so that's not as big of a deal, but it's important. It's actually an important step, because getting into the mindset of what your army is will lead you in a direction on how to build your list. So, for instance, I'm not going to build a list for a Gene Stealer cult that is going to run similar to what I'm going to build for a list for my Dark Angels. They're very different armies on purpose, and they play differently. They have different strengths, they have different weaknesses, and what they're going to be able to do is they're going to when you build a list for them, you have to build them differently with different considerations in mind. So, we figured out which army we're going to bring. The next step comes to, what do I want this army to do? Every army has multiple ways of running it. For instance, I'll start with my Dark Angels. I can run, the three basic ones are Deathwing, Ravenwing, and Greenwing, or just the regular, Marines. And all three of those have very different aspects to them. The Ravenwing are fast and furious, and they've got their bikes, and they've got their land speeders, and they're designed for hitting fast and hitting hard, and that's what they do, and they do it very, very well. But that's, if I'm going to make a Ravenwing list, I need to think about it differently than if I'm going to make a Greenwing list, which is going to have a lot of different more units. So if I'm going to bring a Lion's Blade, or if I'm just going to bring a CAD, I need to start thinking about how I want to run my list. So do I want to form up a gun line and bring a whole lot of guys with some strong weaponry that I can hide back on my table edge and shoot at the enemy as they come to try to get me, forcing them to try to push me off of my table edge and off of my objectives? Or do I want to have a list that's going to get all up in their face really fast? So do I want to shoot up the board with bikes and start to attack them right off the bat? Or do I want to bring some guys in huge huge Terminator armor that can go up there and start punching faces after coming in from deep strike? All of these are different ways of running the same army. So they're all Dark Angels, but they all play very differently. If I'm going to bring a Terminator heavy Deathwing list, if I'm going to bring a bike heavy Ravenwing list, or if I'm going to bring a troop heavy Greenwing list, or just a heavy weapons heavy Greenwing list. Even then, there's whole different variations, but I want to think about what it is that I want to do. So do I want to make the gun line? Do I want to have very fast mobility, jumping back and forth? Or do I want to have some heavy punchers that can get up there and start squishing some people? So, once you've thought about how you want to run your list, how you want this list to run, the next step comes into building that list. And there's a couple different ways to build a list once you get to this point. One of the ways is to come up with a general idea of what you want to do. So say I want to run a really fast list, and the whole point of this is to be able to jump on objectives, be able to run, hit and run, get in and out of the enemy's lines, take out some units, but then get away really quick so that I don't get bogged down and don't get caught up. That's going to be a very wide-ranging concept for a list. So it's going to direct me. So at that point, I'm probably going to be running Raven Wing, and it's going to be bike heavy. So then I start working out which bikes I want to put in there. Do I want to have more Black Knights? Do I want to have more regular bikers? Do I want them to have special weapons? What about land speeders? All of those come in consideration after I've decided that I just want a fast, objective jumping, hitting list. And that works well. It's a good way to start off a base, because from there I can start to narrow down what units I want to bring. But the first concept at that point is fast, is speed and mobility. So it's a general concept for a list that I've come up with first before moving on to anything else, such as figuring out what units I want to bring. Another way to run the list is to think about a keystone that you want to have on your list. So for instance, if I'm running a Green Wing list and I decide that I want to bring my 3 Predator tanks because I love the ability to get Tank Hunter and Monster Hunter on 9 las cannon shots that are flying out of some Predator chassis. I think it works really well. It's a lot of fun, but it's a bit expensive. So at that point, I've decided I want to have this unit on my list, and I'm going to then fashion the rest of my list around it. So I look at it and say, well, what can this handle and what can't it handle? So they're really good at taking out monstrous creatures, big monstrous creatures. They're also really good at taking out enemy armor. They're not as great at taking out hordes of enemy troops, rushing them and just beating them to death with their 10 armor back. So I then can start building around that and be like, all right, well, if I'm going to have those guys there, I should probably have some tactical squads in the back here who can help hold the line and help keep the enemy away from them. Maybe I want to bring an Aegis defense line so they can get some 4-up cover saves, so some Lucky Melta shots are less likely to just shoot them out of the water and blow them up. So then I'm starting to build a list based around a single squadron or unit or key part of a list that I want to bring. So in this case, it's going to be the Predators are the key component of the list, and I build the rest around it. Another concept is you might have a specific type of unit that you want to see work really well. So for instance, say I've just painted up some new Deathwing Knights and I want to get them on the table. I just want to try to use them the best, and I want to see them in action. So at this point, it's similar to what when I was talking about with the Predator tanks, when I have one unit that I want to build the list around. Now you can have one unit that you want to see in action. These are probably more friendly games because you know, seeing what things can do is what you're going to do, you know, with friends or just, you know, on an off night at the club or at your friendly local gaming store. So going back to that, say I want to see what the Deathwing Knights can do, because sometimes I get them in the list and they don't end up doing anything because they get caught foot slogging it, or they get caught getting caught up with a bunch of enemy Griblies that just keep them in combat, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, in this case, I want to see what they can do, so I'm going to make a list that's more likely to get them doing what they do best, which is get into combat and fighting with the enemy's main support units, or main headquarter units. So I go there and I go, well, what's the best way to get them into combat? Well, they've got Terminator armor, so they can deep strike, which will get them back in the enemy lines, but then they have to take an entire turn of just sitting there getting shot at before they can charge in. A lot of times when I do this, they become a big distraction piece, which is great because it allows other units to get into place, but they get shot up really fast, and I don't often get to see the full extent of what it is that they can do because of that, because of being stuck there, being unable to actually enact what they're designed to do, which is get into close combat. Because most of the times, no one wants to really charge them since they're brutal in close combat. So they're going to spend a turn getting shot at, and then they have to spend a turn running up and getting shot in Overwatch. So at best, they're coming in turn 2. They're not charging until turn 3. And at that point, they're going to be whittled down pretty hard. So I don't want to deep strike them in. So how do I get them across the board? They're just going to be foot stomping it otherwise. So I'm going to give them some transports. So I then decide that my list needs to include a Land Raider because it's an assault vehicle with armor 14 that's probably not going to get popped, but it can shoot up the board turn 1 and turn 2. Those guys can come storming down that ramp and charge into the enemy unit of my choice. So now my list starts to take shape around that unit, getting them into combat. So where usually I might not bring a Land Raider, I now want to bring one because I want to be able to put this unit in there and have them charge in. Also, what do I want for an HQ unit? Well, an Interrogator Chaplain works really well in close combat, and that's what I'm looking to see this unit do, and I think the unit would benefit greatly from having some Zealot. So suddenly now my HQ choice is very easy for me. I'm going to take an Interrogator Chaplain. Throw some Terminator armor on him so he fits in with that group, and he can come charging out with them from the Land Raider. Also along those lines, I want to make sure that Land Raider can get into combat and can corral some units into a place where they can charge into. So I'm going to have some fast bikes maybe that I want to go in there so they can start moving in and flanking around the outside and pushing the enemy towards where I can get my Deathwing Knights into combat with. So again, there we go. I start making some considerations for my list based upon getting that unit into combat. So those are the 3 basic ways of concepts that you have to start out with making a list. So once you found your army, once you figured out how you want your army, you want your list to perform and what you want it to do, and then deciding how you want to start making your list, you then have to start figuring out how to formulate a list. So what kind of game are you going to play? Is this just with your friends where you've already talked about ahead of time that you've decided we're going to be playing a Maelstrom game? Or is this going to be completely random? We're going to roll from the book? Or is it going to be a tournament scene where you're not going to have much control over how you're actually going to play, what kind of missions you're going to play, what you have to do in order to win the game? If this is the case, you need to have, for all of these ideas, you have to have a different concept of what you're going to make it. So if you're going to be sure that you're going to be playing a Maelstrom game, that you're going to be jumping on objectives, you better have some mobility. Because if you have a static gun line and the whole point of the game is jumping on objectives, you're not going to perform very well because you're not going to be able to go in and get those objectives that you need in order to win and beat your enemy. But at the same time, if all you're doing is kill points, so all it matters is how many units you can kill, suddenly that gun line becomes very appealing because you get to sit back in a position that you know you have the strength at and force the enemy to come after you. Force the enemy to come try to push you off of that gun line. Tau do it a lot, very well. You can also do it pretty well with Marines. You know, putting, like I said before when I was talking about those the 3 Predators, they make a really good basis for a gun line. Stick them back there behind an Aegis line, and they become very tough to handle because the front armor is 13. And you have to kill all 3 of them in order to get any points. So they become really good at those kill team games. So you might make your list with a gun line if you're playing kill points. But if you're going to do something like a tournament where you don't really know what missions you're going to be facing necessarily, then you need to be able to handle everything. So if mission number 1 is a kill point game, and you have a whole lot of very small units that you would normally use to jump on objectives, they're going to offer up a whole lot of points for your opponent to kill very quickly and be able to go forward. If you're playing an objective mission, or you've got a Maelstrom aspect to it, having a very small elite army becomes very hard to get them in the right places at the right time and still be able to prosecute the kind of attacks that you need to in order to win. So you need to balance these out in that kind of situation because you don't know what you're going to be facing when it comes down to the mission. So the kind of army I would make for a kill point game that I knew I was playing kill points is probably going to be pretty static. It's going to be heavy hitting. It's going to have a relatively small number of units because I don't want to give up kill points to him. But it's going to have enough guns that I can just shoot him as he comes after me. And if he doesn't come after me, I've got less units, so I'm probably going to be able to kill more of his guys than he is me. You know, and I also might want to consider that if he's probably going to run a gun line too, then maybe I also want to run some units that can just just charge into his line and shake it up and make him move, make him get out there and come within range of my gun line that I've set up back on my end. So that's you know, so depending upon the game is gonna alter how you build your army. So if you're gonna be playing Maelstrom, I'm gonna want bikes. They're fast, they're heavy hitting, and they're able to jump onto the objectives that I need to in order to win. But if I'm going to be playing kill points, bikes often get very close to the enemy, and they become an easy target for grav guns. They become an easy target for the Tau gun line. A lot of things that make them go down pretty hard if you're not careful with them. You know, there's always ways. You can always play them however you want them to. But in this case, they're much better at jumping on objectives than they are at going out and killing units, to be fair, in my opinion and what I've experienced. So, you know, depending upon the type of game, you're going to make your list very different. If you're looking for an all-around type of list, then sometimes you have to be able to make a list that can handle everything, which is a lot harder than it sounds. You know, you have to be able to make a list that can jump on objectives, maybe have some objectives secured in there through a CAD with some troops, so that, you know, if it comes down to it and you're both stuck on the same objective, you can still take it and get those very important Maelstrom points. You know, and another option is that you need to be able to prosecute, you need to have units that can hold on to relics. So units that are really hard to kill, but still able to jump up on there. Bikes are pretty good for those, but remember, once you have the relic, it hurts your ability to move. So they're going to have to be able to stand there, basically in place as they get shot at or charged by the enemy. So, you know, if I'm going to have the possibility of charging in for the relic, I'm going to want to have a unit that can go in there, grab it, and slowly move away while still weathering the shots that are coming their way. So if I have a small unit that can jump up and grab the objective, they're going to get shot off it pretty quick if they're not strong enough, if they're not hard enough to hold. Bikes benefit from mobility, and if you minus their mobility, they're not very good at holding that objective. But they're really good at harassing other units to keep them away from your unit that's jumped onto that objective. So you need to make a list that is both mobile and hard-hitting and has the ability to hold places and objectives and situations. So, for instance, let's go back to when I was talking about my Dark Angels with my Tri-Predator Las Cannon squad. In this case, I know I'm going to be able to handle my enemies' big tanks, their big, nasty, monstrous creatures, with that unit. So the rest of the army that I'm building there, after I've got that, doesn't really need to worry too much about that, you know, because I've suddenly got the ability to take his big nasties, and I don't have to fear them anymore. So with that in mind, I then have to think about what other threats I'm going to have. Is my opponent possibly going to be bringing flyers? In which case, those are really nasty to handle. You know, that if you come in there with a couple Storm Ravens and suddenly they've got a guy flying in with his Melty Meltas flying over your Aegis defense line, your Predator tanks are not going to be able to handle that very well. And with him flying in the air, they're going to be snap firing up at him, which is, you got 9 shots, you might get some, but you're not going to get as many as you would like. So with this in mind, I often like to bring along a Mortis Pattern Dreadnought or two, who can then have Skyfire so they can protect their main mission at that point is to protect my Predators. So I'll put them in a position around my Predators so that they can fight off any flyers that come after them. And if he doesn't have any flyers, they can still shoot down the board. 2 Twin Link Las Cannons are nasty regardless. but their main purpose in putting them on a list is to protect my tanks against enemy flyers. So I've now got enemy flyers handled with my list. I now need some things that can jump onto objectives. So maybe I throw in some bikes, maybe I throw in an attack bike or two, because they're small units, they're pretty fast, they don't get caught up as easily in getting charged at, because they're not as big a target, to be honest. And if you put a multi-melt on them, yeah, they're dangerous against enemy armor, or if you throw a heavy bolter on them, they're able to throw a whole bunch of shots out at enemy infantry. So they become a very good choice at that point because they're fast. So if I want, I could just flat them out. I've had a couple games that I've won because of attack bikes flatting out at the last turn onto an objective, or to contest an objective, or to hold an objective. Either which way, that last turn ability to just move 12 and then flat out an additional 12. 24-inch threat range is hard to keep in mind when you're playing a game, especially when you don't use it very often until that very last turn. So I like to keep the element of surprise with my bikes a bit when I'm playing them during the game. I very rarely flat them out unless I need to jump onto an objective for points during the game, in order to make sure that when I need that flat out, my opponent's less likely to have considered that when it comes time to use it. So I'm going to throw in a couple bike units on there, maybe some regular bike units, maybe some Black Knight units, because they're really good at running in and running into enemy shooting infantry and locking them in combat or trying to slaughter them. Corvus hammers can do a nasty bit of work on a lot of different units. So I can use those guys to charge in there and jump on objectives, or go and occupy enemy shooty units. I'm also going to want to have some bodies on the ground, because at this point, that's my Predator tanks are a big point sink, and I'm gonna be because of that. They've only got 3 models between them that can go in. Technically, 3 shots from a Melta could take out that squadron. Most of the time that doesn't happen. I've had it happen, but most of the time it's not going to happen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you want to put all your eggs in one basket. So part of this is that knowing that you've only got 3 tanks for that big unit there, maybe you buy some scouts, because they're the cheapest option to get the most number of bodies on the table. And they can hold objectives very well. They're not very. They don't draw a lot of aggro. They don't draw a lot of enemy firepower, because they're just maybe some bolter bros, or maybe they've got some sniper rifles, which can be effective, but they aren't as scary as 3 Predator tanks full of las cannons, or 2 mortis pattern dreadnoughts with las cannons, or Black Knights running up behind your enemy lines. So they're good at jumping up there, being innocuous, not really drawing much attention, and holding on to those objectives. And if you throw them in a CAD, which I'm kind of talking about here, they're good. They got that, Now I also want to think about, maybe, what am I going to do if my opponent has a really strong gun line? I want to try to drive them out of there. A good way to do that is some drop pods. So do I want to have some tactical squads with drop pods going in there, or maybe a command squad with drop pods and melta-guns, so they can drop behind his enemy vehicles and start popping them and just causing a menace? Because the second you start throwing units behind your enemy's defenses and behind their lines, it starts to mess with their game plan. They've got an idea of what they want to do, they know how they want to prosecute, and suddenly they've got a drop pod right in front of them or right behind them, and guys coming out with melta-guns, guys coming out with grav cannons, however you want to do it. Drop pods are a really good way of messing with your opponent's plans and messing with their list, because they then have to consider it. They can either ignore that drop pod back there that's going to now get you line breaker, or they can go and handle it, and in which case, every time that they're going to be handling your drop pod and those guys is a turn that they can't really focus fire and take out your big heavy tank unit. So if their giant monstrous creature is too busy having to handle these 5 melta bros behind enemy lines there, he's not going to be able to move up and shoot at your tanks. you know? So they act as a really great way to kind of control the way the game, control the flow of the game. You know, if you can dictate what your enemy has to do, you're in control. And when you're in control, you're far more likely to be able to enact your plans and win the points necessary to eventually win the game. So, I like to throw in some drop pod units. You know, 1 or 2 units with drop pods is really great. A regular dreadnought with an assault cannon and a heavy flamer dropping in behind enemy lines is a real pain in the butt for people to have to handle. You know, they've got a situation there where you've got a unit that can charge in the turn after he deep strikes with the drop pod, which could be turn 1, which is really nice. He can charge into a unit, and he's got, you know, some strength 10 punches there, and now there's 4 of them plus the charge. That's scary to anything, really. There's nothing that isn't afraid of a dreadnought in close combat. You know, they can, you know, there's people that can handle them better than others, but no one is really excited about seeing them on the battlefield right up in their face. And they become, I like to call them a distraction dread, because they have to handle them, because if you ignore them, they're going to ruin your day. And if you handle them, again, because I put them back there, I'm now dictating what's happening during the game. I'm dictating that my opponent needs to be able to handle them, needs to go try to face them off. Otherwise, I know he's going to be in trouble, and he knows that too. So a couple of units that can help to dictate the flow of the game is really helpful. And drop pods are really great at doing that, because you can put them where you want to draw the enemy's attention. So either away from units that you want to be free, or to just throw it in there and throw it into the mix and make your enemy have to handle them instead of handling everyone else that's coming up. So, you know, that's kind of what you want to have in a general all-around list. You want to have units that can dictate the flow of play. You want to have units that can hurt their big heavy hitters, because most lists come with big heavy hitters. So they're either going to have some big monstrous creatures, or they're going to have some big tanks or something in there that does something nasty. You're also going to want to have some mobility, some fast mobility, so you can jump on objectives, so that you can react to the enemy every once in a while. Most of the time, you don't want to be just reacting to the enemy. If you're reacting to the enemy, again, they're controlling the flow of play, and they're in a position of power at that point. It becomes very hard when all you're doing is reacting to really grab hold of the game and win. But there come times when things don't go the way you want them to, and you need to be able to react to it. So say you had some scouts on an objective and they get killed off and you didn't expect that, you better be able to have a fast unit that can go run up and take that objective that you thought was controlled by the scouts, but now suddenly, because they died, isn't. So having that mobility is important, regardless of whether you're playing Maelstrom or if you're playing objectives or whether you're playing anything, really. You also want to have in a list a unit that is hard to kill. You know, whether it's Terminator armor with storm shields, because, you know, 2-up armor save, 3-up invul save are hard to get through. Regardless of who you are, you know, unless you roll ones like I do, in which case, you know, good luck to you. But having a unit on the board that the enemy has to throw a lot of power at in order to handle is important, because you can either use that unit to jump onto an objective, or you could just use that unit to, again, dictate the flow of play. So you can have that unit just keep pushing up into the enemy's lines, and they've got to respond to that. So while they're busy responding to that unit there, which they may eventually kill, but if they're pushing into that, and if they're taking care of that unit that's pushing their enemy lines, they can't focus on your other units that are going around shooting their units off of objectives, or that's going around grabbing objectives. So you need to be able to have that. And honestly, that's what you need in a list. You know, if you can fill all those different roles, you're going to have a very, very strong list. Another thing to consider in a list is maybe going into it with a formation in mind that you want to try. So say you were looking at the Skyhammer Annihilation Force, and you're like, that looks like it would be a lot of fun. Being able to drop first turn, throw in some Devastators, throw in some assault troops that can assault. It is a lot of fun. I've run them. It's a lot of fun. So if you want to do that, then that's what you begin your list building as. I want to run this formation, so let me build around it. So I did that. I made a list, and I was like, I want to run Skyhammer Annihilation Force because I think it'd be fun to be able to do that, and I think it'd be pretty effective. So I looked at that list, and I was like, what does it lack that I would need to have a balanced list? Does it have the ability to hit and kill the big nasties? Well, the way I like to run them is with as much grav as I can fit inside of a drop pod. So those grav cannons are going to just make a mess of giant monstrous creatures or monstrous creatures, and with the number of shots that you can throw on it, it's going to be able to handle most any vehicles as well. Because glancing on 6s, and as long as they're not a super heavy vehicle, they're going to be immobilized with one glance of a 6. So if someone's running at you with a Gladius Strike Force with a whole bunch of vehicles that they've got for free, I mean, you can just go around shooting all of their vehicles and immobilizing them, and an immobile Rhino is not very effective, if I'm being honest. So, yes, they can handle the big scaries. They've got the big, strong, shooty abilities. Are they able to dictate the flow of the game? I've got 2 drop pods full of Devastators and 2 assault squads that get to that have benefits like being able to reroll to wounds into hits, reroll to wounds into hits against units that have gone to ground because of my Devastators. And they can also charge that first turn they come in, so they don't have to just sit there and get shot at. They can go in there and charge that first turn that they come in, and get and tie up enemy units or destroy enemy units in close combat, because they're not bad at combat. It's just a matter of getting them in there. With this case, you can deep strike them in and still charge that first turn they come in, which is beautiful. So can they control the flow of play? Yes. Are they mobile? Not as much, because those drop pods are going to have to drop where I can fully utilize the shooting of the guns. They're not really designed for dropping in to control objectives. Sometimes you can place them on objectives and get them in a place where they can shoot from, or drop them in to get line breaker. But the main goal of those drop pods is to get those Devastator squads in a place where they can shoot. So they're not really looking at holding territory or holding objectives. They're looking at getting people to where they need to shoot. And those assault troops are not very reliable. They can be fast, they can, move 12 inches, but they're not super reliable that they're going to be on there, because I've had a number of times when they've just deep struck off the board that first turn and killed themselves, And if your list is going to be susceptible to that kind of thing, that's not really being able to put the mobility that you're going to need for jumping on Maelstrom objectives or be able to respond to the enemy, like I've said before. So, with that in mind, I thought, well, if what I'm really missing from this list is some mobility, why don't I pair it up with the most mobile of units of forces that I have, which is a Ravenwing Strike Force. A whole bunch of bikes running in there and being able to jump on objectives, be able to respond to the enemy, taking the fight to them when I want to, running away when I don't want to. Acting as distraction to try to keep my my Devastators alive as long as possible, which is not necessarily super long, considering people usually like to get grav guns off the table. So now I'm left with the situation. So it's okay. So I'm going to run with my Ravenwing Strike Force. Now I look at how I want to run this list. So there's a couple different ways I could run a list with a Ravenwing Strike Force and a Skyhammer Annihilation Force. What I could do is I can depend entirely upon the Ravenwing Strike Force to be a distraction unit to keep my deep striking Skyhammer alive, and I can use them entirely to hold objectives, in which case I probably want to start them on the board so I've got more control over where they're going to be and what they're going to do. Or I could try to run a little bit of a shenanigan, which is fun to do sometimes. And I do it very often, actually, with this list that I'm talking about, is the Ravenwing Strike Force has the ability to start completely off the board, and they're guaranteed to come in turn 2. So when I'm looking at these formations, I'm looking at what they provide me. The Skyhammer Annihilation Force can come in turn 1. Can come in turn 1 or turn 2, my choice. But I'm guaranteed to be able to bring him in turn 1. Which means that even if I start with nothing on the board, turn 1 comes along and I will be able to have all of my Skyhammer Annihilation Force on the board and not be afraid of being tabled turn 1. Because if I have nothing on the board at the end of turn 1, my opponent wins. And that's not fun if you lose that way. I've actually won a game that way because my opponent had kept a lot of his units in reserve. At the end of turn 1, I managed to drop in and kill the units that he had on the board that he was hoping to hold the line and allow his units to come in from reserves. So turn 1, I was able to clear him off the board, and I won the game, which was pretty brutal. So you don't want to face that. So Skyhammer Annihilation Force helps protect that, because you don't even have to roll for it. There's not a chance of you failing a roll. There's not a chance of someone bringing a Calidus and making you have to roll on a 6. You don't roll. You just come in the turn that you want, turn 1 or turn 2. Ravenwing Strike Force has an option of either starting everyone on the board or everyone in reserve. They all have to do that, so you can't just put half and half. So, but if I put everyone in reserve, they automatically come in turn 2. No need to roll, that's when they come in. So if I've got nothing on the board, and they start in reserve, I'm going to automatically lose on turn 1 unless I can get something on the board. So now I'm looking at a situation with, if I have both of these guys off the board turn 1, it's called a null deployment. I've now put a situation where I can control the game flow, because I'm going to force my opponent to deploy his forces without any knowledge of how I'm going to deploy my forces. You know, and this is more than just being able to deploy second in a game. This is even better than that, because now if I go second on turn 1, he's got nothing that he gets to try to respond to on the board. So you can't shoot anything, and he doesn't know where I'm coming in, because I have complete control over my drop pods. And when I put in my Skyhammer Annihilation Force, turn 1 they come in, they hit really hard, but then they're kind of vulnerable, because I've put them in a place where they can shoot, and if they're in a place where they can shoot, they're at a place where they can get shot at. And there's not a whole lot of them there. You know, the way I like to run it is 10-man Devastator squads, combat squatted. So I end up with 6 5-man Marine squads and 2 drop pods, which is really hard to clear off turn 1. But if you give 2 turns of concerted effort, it's possible to wipe it off. So if I'm rolling for reserve starting turn 2, I'm going to hope that I roll well in order to come in and try to support this Skyhammer that's dropped in. But with the Ravenwing Strike Force, suddenly I'm able to just come in turn 2 without fear, and the rest of my army's there. So the whole army is now on the board turn 2, and I've had control over how they come in, so I can outflank with the bikes in my Ravenwing Strike Force. I can deep strike land speeders. I can do a whole lot of different things and control where I have my units, so that I can see how he deploys. I can counter deploy by where I move in my forces. I can also, by moving in my forces the way I want to, control where he then has to respond, and he's not going to be in an ideal position to respond because he didn't know where I was going. He didn't know where I was coming. Null deployment is very hard to play against. And if you're playing like an ITC mission that first turn, if I don't have any units on the board, it's very hard for him to get first strike. He's got to hope that I either deep strike mishap, or that I can charge with my assault squad and then lose that combat in order for him to get that first strike, or get first blood, anything like that. It starts to have a situation where I control the flow of the game, which is really beneficial in eventually winning the game. So I like to do that. It's fun. It's not fun to play against necessarily. I only really reserve that kind of mentality and that kind of list for a tournament play where the idea is to win. And I'm not an ass about it. I'm a nice guy. I talk about it. I'm very clear about what I'm going to be doing, even though I don't technically have to say. I'm very clear about what I'm doing. People know what's going to happen. And you have to just be a nice guy about it. Don't just like rub it in. Don't be a dick, and you should be fine. But again, that's probably not what you want to bring if you're just you and your friends having a couple drinks inside of your garage. That's the kind of list that you want to bring if you know the whole point is really to win, which is what tournament play is about. But yeah, that's all. That's the different ways of building lists. You know, do you have figure out your army, and then from there figure out how you want your list to play. Do you have a specific formation that you want to run? Do you have a specific unit that you want to run? Do you have a specific unit that you want to see in action to see how it plays so that you can help dictate how you build lists in the future? Do you have all your bases covered? So are you able to jump on objectives? Are you able to go out and kill the enemy when you need to? Are you able to control the flow of the game? Are you able to dictate how your opponent has to respond to both your forces and their own even as it goes along? Have you managed to have a list that's going to be able to counter all of the different tools that your opponent might be throwing your way? Do you have a way to handle his flyers? Do you have a way to handle her mass amount of Ghiblies that are running at your face? If you don't have the ability to handle all of those, you're going to be left with a situation that you're just not going to win. It becomes very tough to win when you're on the back foot, and those can be fun, but it's not fun to do every single time you play. But with a little forethought and a little consideration of what you need to do to win, you can put together a list that's going to be able to handle anything your opponent's going to bring. Because if I consider how I build my lists, I don't really fear what my opponent's going to bring. Certain lists are harder for me to handle than others, but there's no list that I can't physically beat as long as I consider all of those different aspects when I build a list. So my list that I have with the Skyhammer Annihilation Force and the Ravenwing Strike Force has been very effective for me because it hits all the aspects of how to win a game. Control the flow of the game, be able to jump on objectives, and be able to hit in all of his strong heavies before they're able to hit you. So if I'm able to do all that, there are very few lists out there that I can't handle. And with that in mind, I can go into a tournament and go into a situation where I don't know what my opponent's bringing and still feel confident that I can win a game, And in the end, sometimes it comes down to dice, other times it comes down to just a contest of wills, contest of brains between you and your opponent. And that becomes a lot of fun. And as long as you can go into it knowing that you have a chance, that your list provides you with the opportunity to win, that's the most you can hope for with list building. So I hope that's been helpful. I know it's not the end-all be-all. There's a lot of people that will probably just tell you to go and figure out the nastiest, cheesiest formation. But if you don't know how to play it and you don't want to play it the way that it's designed to be played, you're still not going to win. So figure out how you want to play it, figure out what army you want to play, and make a list that will allow you to do that. So I hope that's been helpful. I actually got more work on these guys done than I thought I would. I've got 2 more guys that I've got to finish putting the first bit of basing. I've been putting on some astrogranite debris. And what I'll do is once that dries, I'll put a quick dry brush, and then I'll put on some Valhalla Blizzard, which is my go-to basing combination for my Gene Stealer cults. But again, I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was informative. Let me know below what kind of lists that you guys like to bring and how you go about figuring out how you want to bring your list. Let me know, what kind of considerations you make personally when making a list. Do you just try to bring whatever's fun and cool? Do you try to bring what can cover your bases? What goes into your mind when you're making a list? Is it the same things I talk about? Do you agree with it? Or do you disagree? Do you think that what I just said was complete hooey? Whatever it is, let me know down below what you think and continue the conversation down there. So, I hope you guys have liked this. Share, like, subscribe to the videos, and more will keep coming. I've really been listening to what you guys have been saying, and I think that going forward we're going to have a really cool channel, and I'm really excited about everything that is going to post. So, I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always, And until next time, everybody, have fun.